So let's get underway. I want to give you a warm welcome. My name is Clint Vince, and I chair Dentons Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank, as well as our energy practice, together with my teammate Emma Hand. We're going to have Christine Scanlon, the awesome CEO of the Keystone Policy Center, give us a welcome, and then we'll hear from another awesome leader, Paula Gold-Williams, who is the chair of the board of the Keystone Policy Center. Christine, would you like to begin?
I would love to. Thank you, Clint. And good morning, everyone. I am calling in from Keystone, Colorado, where it's a beautiful sunny day and a brisk 10 degrees, but the skiing is great. So I'm thankful to join all of you this morning. I want to first acknowledge Clint and Dentons, who has collaborated with us now on a series of these conversations, and they're really fabulous, impactful, and such amazing leaders that we get a chance to hear from. So thank you, Clint. As Clint mentioned, I want to recognize Paula Gold-Williams, chair of our board of trustees. Paula has been an amazing leader for us here at Keystone, and we really appreciate her vision with our organization. We have a couple of other Keystone family members, I would say, by directly or through affiliation. Bob Gee is a long ago energy board member with Keystone, so it's terrific, Bob, to see you today. We have a long affiliation with EEI. Terrific to have EEI on, and recognizing CPS Energy, who we were introduced through Paula too, and just really appreciate the work now happening with Rudy. So welcome all. And the Colorado connection with Dwayne Hiley is also remarkable. And we were just talking about, there's a terrific article in the Denver Post today that Clint will reference. Dwayne has been a transformational leader with his role at Tri-State, and I can attest to that as a Coloradan. And in my former role with Governor Hickenlooper in the governor's office, where Dwayne mentioned he just saw Senator Hickenlooper, and that relationship was sometimes challenging, but not today. So really a transformational leader that we get to hear from. For folks who don't know the Keystone Policy Center, we have been a nonprofit organization working on important policy issues since 1975 in our founding here in Keystone, Colorado. We also have offices in Denver and Washington, D.C. Our mission is to bring impactful, thoughtful leaders together who may not always agree or see particular perspectives aligned, and through deep conversation, dialogue, and really good intent, we've managed to see transformational policy changes happen when Keystone's involved. We're grateful for everyone today, both listening in and participating, who knows Keystone has in fact also participated in our work. The world's got a little bit more challenging, but that's just meant that Keystone is even more important in what we do today with our mission. Hopefully folks have a chance to look at the recent project coming out of Keystone's Energy Board that was completed a few months ago, focused on federal decarbonization policies and ideas. And we hope to build off of that effort going into 2022. So again, welcome. We're grateful for our partnership with Dentons, all of the folks who are participating today, and those of you listening in. So Clint, with that, I'll go back to you.
Thank you so much, Christine. And now we'll have an introduction from Keystone's board chair, Paula Gold-Williams.
All right. Well, thank you, Clint. And I want to thank everyone who's attending today.
Paula, can you go on?
Can you hear?
Yeah,
can you
there
hear
you are. Yes.
All right.
And
okay.
We can see. Whoops.
And you can see me?
We could for a moment. Can you come back on video?
There we go. All right.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for attending today. It has been a great collaboration that Keystone has had with Dentons. I had the fortune myself to be introduced to Dentons by my predecessor, Doyle Beneby. And I have watched this organization that has a rich legacy from a policy perspective at Keystone make the right connections. And then Dentons itself, the think tank. The think tank globally is doing the right thing in terms of making sure that we're having a conversation here in the United States, but also thinking about it from a very global perspective. So the collaboration between Keystone and Dentons has been phenomenal. Everything from our first conversation with Phil Sharp, our former Congressman Phil Sharp, and that was inspiring. And we had a tremendous conversation at that time, and things are moving so quickly. Then in December, we had a keynote from Arshad Mansour, the president and CEO of EPRI. So from that perspective, we want to continue these conversations. We had a wonderful set of speakers last time, and just like we have today. Christina's covered and talked a lot about our speakers today. The one thing I think is different and special. Before we had panels, and they were grand panels, and Clint, you did a beautiful job of making sure that we had a robust conversation. But today, I think you're going to hear more intimate conversations between two people. We have wonderful people from Dentons interviewing each person on our agenda. So you're going to be able to go a bit deeper with us as we have these conversations. And I know Clint's going to work really hard to make sure that we have a perspective to give you some time to ask us questions at the end. So I know that we touched on it earlier. I want to say thanks to Dwayne from Tri-State. I mean, he has been with us on several occasions and it's always inspiring. I want to do a special shout out to Rudy Garza. Rudy is my friend and my successor. And I couldn't be more proud of him. You're going to have hear a conversation between him and Adriana, because Rudy is the first Hispanic leader of a utility company, and particularly at CPS Energy. And it has been nothing but a pleasure to watch him grow, to bring his talents. He's an engineer and has an MBA and has a gift of relationship building. And it really came through over the last couple of weeks. He was successful in a rate case. We haven't had a rate case in more than 8 years, and he was successful in bringing that home. So he has a bunch of perspective to provide, and I'm really excited to connect him with Keystones. And I'm really, really happy that you're going to hear from him today. You're going to hear from Lawrence. Every once in a while, I get the pleasure of being in a meeting with Lawrence, and his practicality as well as his ability, he brings it to the conversation from his leadership position internationally at EEI, but he's always there to think about technically what matters, but also help us have a real conversation about what works and does not work. And then Kate, I so much look forward to hearing from you today. So we have all of that happening, and then another personal favorite, Bob. Bob's just been a kind person to me as I learned my way in the energy industry. But again, he shares his personal ideas, but his deep knowledge of policy and the complexities that we're all facing. You know, I think what I want to close with again is CPS Energy runs, you know, the utility in Texas for the largest municipally owned electric and gas company. And the footprint is specific, but it also expands itself to about 15% of its business goes to the full state of Texas. But our view a long time ago was these issues in the industry are global, they are real. When I talk to CEOs from around the world, we're all facing the same issues in the industry, but it will not get better with a bunch of utility executives talking to each other. What matters is having these conversations broadly, bringing in more people into the conversation, us joining those conversations from a policy perspective again, and that's what we're able to do at Keystone. We have all kinds of conversations about the nexus point that we have between energy, everything from natural resources, how our country manages those, as well as what the global conversation should be around natural resources, and many, many more. So it is my absolute pleasure to be the chair of Keystone Policy Center, to be a part of the Energy Board, to be a part of the Dentons think tank. And it is my absolute pleasure to turn it back over to you, Clint, so we can get started.
Thank you so much, Paula. Perfect. And I'm so glad you all mentioned our dear friend Phil Sharp, who was our inaugural key conversation and really set such a high bar for us. But I have to say that Keystone has been meeting that bar in our follow-up conversations. And I would just ask if you are not muted, if you could mute now, that would be great, because we're getting a tiny bit of feedback. There we go. And we're going to start out with Dwayne Hiley. We're going to keep our introductions quite short and really save time to hear from our speakers. Dwayne is the transformative leader of Tri-State. He has already won the admiration of leading, not just leading government officials like Senator Hickenlooper, but also environmental officials. In fact, Dwayne, you are on the front page of Energy Daily today, as well as the Denver Post. We always try to time these webinars so we have celebrities on the day when they're receiving great acclaim. So can you describe a little bit Tri-State and what the reason you're on the front page of Energy Daily?
It's probably something infamous, Clint, but your timing's always impeccable. So as you all know, Tri-State's one of those very poorly named companies that serves through 42 utility members in 4 states. So we serve 42 nonprofit utilities in Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico. So 200,000 square miles of the American West. We're member owned by those 42 utilities, who are in turn member owned by their about 1.5 million consumers at the end of the line. So I guess the front page news today was Tri-State's announcement of its filing of a resource plan with the state of Colorado, where we achieved agreement with over 20, I think Denver Post says 24 stakeholders, including environmental NGOs, cooperative members systems, government agencies. Lots of stakeholders weighed in on this resource plan, the first one filed by Tri-State, in which we are demonstrating that we will meet an 80% carbon reduction for energy delivered to Colorado by the year 2030. We're already in the middle of that transformation, adding thousands of megawatts of wind and solar and retiring coal plants in Colorado and New Mexico. Last year, we had about 36% of our energy coming from non-emitting sources. We hit the month of November, had 40 as we brought on a new wind farm. And by 2024, half the energy we deliver will be clean energy. By the end of the decade, across all 4 states, we'll be at 70% clean energy. But we'll be doing that in the cooperative way by maintaining reliability and lowering cost to members. So we've just announced the second of 2 rate decreases. It's so hard to say that. I'm so used to saying rate increase as a utility executive, but we're having rate decreases. And I think that's a pretty rare thing in the industry these days, to be able to announce an energy transformation of this magnitude while reducing costs for members. But we do that because that's who we work for, our members. Thank you,
Dwayne. And as you move from and deactivate some of your fossil fuel facilities, move toward renewables, what are some of the challenges you're facing, including transmission?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, we're trying to take care of those communities that are left behind. Ensuring a just transition for the formerly coal-dependent communities is really essential for us. As a cooperative, those are our members in those communities that we're serving, so we care a lot about what happens for them. We're reinvesting in renewables in those areas to restore lost tax base, and we're helping them with economic development. But as we look at the need to build out so much renewable energy in our area, we believe we have to have an RTO in the West to help balance the massive amount of renewables that we and our neighbors are building to meet these state policy goals. We just can't do it within any single utilities balancing area, and we're going to have that done over multiple states. So we're pushing hard for an RTO that will also help us debottleneck the transmission system. In particular, we're pushing hard for increased east to west transmission so that we can move this renewable energy across time zones and have it have greater value.
And what do you feel about joining an RTO versus creating an RTO? out west?
Well, so in the West, you've got, in California, you have the California ISO, which has a day-ahead market. Southwest Power Pool is the westmost RTO in the Eastern Interconnect. So they come right up to our border. In fact, some of our customers in Nebraska are served in SPP footprint. We'd really like to see SPP expand west. There is a body of thinking out there that maybe the West should just create its own RTO from scratch. And, when you think about that, the SPP tariff right now is like 2,500 pages. There's been a lot of work to develop that over the years, and it's not a trivial task to think about getting all the states together and agreeing on a new set of rules. I really just don't think we have time for that. While that might be a very admirable intellectual exercise, we need to move fast to meet these state energy policy goals. And as we're going to be adding thousands of megawatts in wind and solar to push out the fossil fuels, we're going to have a balancing area much bigger than any one of our utility balancing areas. Hence, our desire to move quickly with someone who's already got a model ready to go, rather than create one from scratch, which could take several years and delay our ability to get to those policy goals.
How about resilience, Dwayne? As you're moving so quickly, what are you doing to ensure resilience in addition to transmission support?
Storm Uri was the real test for us last year in February. Over Valentine's Day, we had about 5 days there where our wind farms were not producing. When it gets really cold, that's a pretty common occurrence. And in the winter, our loads peak early in the morning, and that's a little too early for the solar panels to be helping us. So we really relied on fossil fuels to get us through that event and to keep us from having extreme rate increases. We actually fell back on fuel oil when natural gas went to 100 times its normal price. So having a diverse power supply is the key to resiliency, and keeping fossil fuels in the mix, even though we won't use them very much, when we need them, we really, really need them. And Storm Uri was an example of that. In the resource plan that we just filed, where we had all those stakeholders come together and come to agreement and a settlement, it includes a gas plant that is in there with the retirement of coal. And that plant is there it doesn't run much, but when it has to run, it really has to run. So it's there to preserve that resilience and reliability that you count on.
And a couple of years ago, under your leadership, Tri-State did something that in the past would have been unusual. It's becoming more of a trend with electric cooperatives that are in multi-state jurisdictions. You requested FERC jurisdiction and took steps to achieve that. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I have to explain that because so many people said, what were you thinking? You want to be regulated by FERC? The case was, Tri-State is an interstate utility. It serves at wholesale nonprofit electric utilities in 4 states. So what we had developing with different state policy goals, actually kind of a war between the states with Tri-State stuck in the middle. New Mexico and Colorado are moving more quickly in green energy goals. Wyoming and Nebraska are moving more slowly. And that created a real tension for us. We needed one federal rate regulator that would look at things from a global perspective for us and an interstate basis, and where all of our members would have a voice. So the deal being, if the state of Colorado has a PUC hearing, they're not likely to want to hear from people in Wyoming or Nebraska. Their job is to take care of Colorado consumers. So now that we're under one federal regulator, we have everyone that can have a voice in what our rates are, and it's one independent voice when it comes to making those decisions on our rates.
And Dwayne, if you were to take a step back and look beyond Tri-State at the full energy industry and utility industry in the U.S., what are 1 or 2 of the key themes that you are most focused on this year and see developing?
For us this year, it's completing this energy transition. It's maybe 3 themes, completing it while preserving reliability and reducing costs. So for us, we're in a very big push to reduce costs. Across the country, we've seen this boom bust cycle before, and we're coming into a period of general shortage across the country where having steel on the ground is going to make a difference for you when you get to those severe weather events like we had in Storm Uri. So I think there's going to be an increase in redevelopment for some reliable resources that will run, that preserve that resiliency we talked about. And that's going to be a nationwide movement that, we've been living off some surplus here for the last several years, but it's about time to build again.
Are you encountering cyber-related issues, and is that one of the things that you also are taking a hard look at right now?
Yeah, I have the opportunity to serve as the co-chair of the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, where we partner with several government agencies and work with at the cabinet level with administration officials to preserve security and both cyber and physical security for utilities. And the threat is different now, and we're very much under attack continuously. And I can show you the logs for our servers, but we're not under attack by youths in their basement. We're under attack by nation states, and you can see it's coming from Russia, it's coming from China, and they're serious about getting into our network and having control. So especially at a time when Russia's getting ready to do something in Ukraine, I think we have to be extremely vigilant for nation state attacks. And if you don't think they're in your network, if you don't think they're in your network, they probably are right now watching you.
Yes. Dwayne, as you, if you were to just summarize the most essential theme that you want to convey to this audience in one sentence or two sentences, what would you like to convey?
I think 4 words: we can do it. This transition is hard, but we can do it, and we can do it while controlling costs and maintaining reliability. I think we're showing that.
What a terrific discussion. I've got, we have a Q&A feature on this platform. I should have mentioned at the very beginning of our discussion that if anyone has a pressing question, please put it into the Q&A feature. Please stay away from the chat room because I don't have enough competency to monitor the chat room as well as Q&A and engage in a discussion as fascinating as the one that we have just had. So we are on schedule in a great way, and I'm now going to ask my colleague Adriana Velez Leon, who actually suggested to us that we use this fireside chat format instead of a panel discussion today, because she wanted an opportunity for us to develop the character and essential qualities of the leaders, as well as the key topics that they are working on. And so I always try to do whatever Adriana suggests, because it's always, I always end up in a better place. She's a young superstar in our energy practice. And with that, Adriana, let me thank Dwayne for a great discussion and invite you to begin your conversation with our good friend, Rudy Garza.
Thank you, Clint. Appreciate it. Well, hi, everyone. As Clint mentioned, I am Adriana Velez Leon. I am an associate with the energy group at our Washington, D.C. office. And I'm joined today by Rudy Garza, interim president and CEO of CPS Energy, which is the nation's largest municipally owned electric and natural gas utility. So welcome, Rudy. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. So before we talk a little bit about your background and your work at CPS, I wanted to start things off talking about diversity, because as a Hispanic woman, diversity is very important to me, and I know diversity is important to you as well. And as Paula mentioned earlier today, Rudy is the first Hispanic leader to hold the position of CEO at CPS. So Rudy, I wanted to ask you, given that you're located in San Antonio, which has a predominantly Hispanic and Latino community, what does it mean to you to be the first Hispanic CEO at CPS, and how has your diversity sort of influenced your leadership style at CPS?
Well, Adriana, thank you for hosting me in this fireside chat. And I couldn't be more appreciative of Keystone for including me with this really fantastic group of leaders. I want to begin by just thanking Paula Gold Williams, my predecessor, and one of my many mentors that have helped me prepare me for an opportunity like this. I would not be sitting in this seat right now if it wasn't for leaders like Paula Gold Williams and the work she has done to lay the road ahead for young leaders like myself. I can't really express the humility I feel in being the first to do anything. You know, that all I've been trying to do is work hard and learn and grow and prepare myself to do whatever the good Lord puts in front of me to do, and finding myself as interim president and CEO of CPS Energy utility that has got such a history of forward-thinking, progressive policy work in our industry. It's just a very humbling position to be in. I've gotten so many text messages, Adriana, from colleagues and friends and people I don't even know, who are excited about the fact that, somebody that looks like them, that comes from, similar backgrounds and circumstances. I grew up, my grandparents raised me. I was a product of teenage parents, grew up in an 800 square foot home in the west side of Corpus Christi, Texas, in a house that, had no air conditioning. So when I talk about where I come from, there's a lot of people in my community who really identify with that. And so, for me, my drive is to make sure that I do it right, to make sure that I stay connected to the community, and that I recognize that, my success isn't so much about, me and my future. I kind of feel like I'm playing with house money right now, in the position I'm in, but it's what, it's what I represent to 70% of Latinos in San Antonio. Our population is about 70% Latino here. So it's really important that I set the right example for young kids that, that have never seen someone that looks like them in charge of a community asset that is so important to San Antonio like CPS Energy.
Wonderful. And just turning to your background, can you talk a little bit about how you got here and your journey and sort of the path that led you to where you are today as interim CEO and president of CPS?
Well, again, where I come from, I couldn't imagine, I couldn't even wrap my head around the idea of being a CEO. I'm not sure I knew what a CEO was, growing up and, going to inner city school, high school. But, I had really good advice on, I got into the electrical engineering school at UT Austin, which at the time was probably the fourth ranked, EE school. I still serve on their advisory board, as a matter of fact. And so, I made a good decision to get an engineering degree, and, through a series of internships that I did up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in the private sector for TXU Corporation at the time, I really got an opportunity, to see what the utility industry had to offer. I've probably moved around as much, or more than anybody that I know over the course of my career. I was told early on to never turn down an opportunity, even if I wasn't quite sure what that opportunity, entailed. So, and Paula has said it, just say yes. When you have opportunities to take on a new role that's going to teach you a different element of the business, I've said yes. And it's been through really a series of mentors, Adriana, that's led me to this point. I've had such great mentors over the course of my career, mentors who've taught me the rates and regulatory, policy aspects of the business that, have taught me how utilities earn revenue and, how we budget, to provide service. I've had mentors that I spent a lot of time in the political side of the business doing governmental affairs work. So I had mentors who taught me, how to understand policy. I've had mentors, who have taught me the operational aspects of the business, my background really isn't the distribution and the wire side of the business, but I've helped, get permits for transmission lines being built all over the state of Texas. One of the last, plants that was built by my previous company, I was responsible for getting permitted at the TCEQ here in Texas. And then when I got to CPS Energy over the course of my career, Dole Beneby, Paula's predecessor, put the idea in my head that with my background, I had the opportunity to be a CEO if I could wrap my head around that. And so he put the idea of me being capable of being CEO, and then Paula challenged me to do the work I needed to do to position myself to have the opportunity. So between not saying no to any opportunities that have come my way, and really listening to the mentors over the course of my career, I think that's what's gotten me into this position.
Great. So I wanted to talk about key challenges that CPS has faced during the past year, particularly because we are at the 1-year anniversary of Winter Storm Uri, which, as was an unprecedented winter storm that caused just widespread damage and service interruptions throughout Texas. I also read this morning in the news that there's a winter storm possibly approaching Texas. So looking back, what are the lessons learned from this event, and moving forward, what steps does CPS plan on taking or has already taken in order to be better prepared for these types of extreme weather events?
That's a great question, Adriana. Don't laugh at us, but here in Texas, even the threat of the potential for snow pretty much shuts down our community. So, schools are let out. It's, 35 degrees outside, but it's pretty dry. And, most of the school kids here in San Antonio are at home today. So, there's a lot of anxiety today as a result of what was experienced back in February. And as I've been talking to the media here locally about all the preparation activity CPS Energy has done to really learn from Winter Storm Uri and to apply those learnings to our operation, going into this winter season and into the future, we got to acknowledge that it was a really tough experience for, really not just Texas, but the entire central U.S. was in the exact same position we were in. Customers weren't so upset that they were out. They understood it was cold. They understood the state of Texas was blanketed in snow and ice. The fact was that because we lost so much generation, we found ourselves in a multi-day rotating outage situation, and then because of how much we actually had to reduce the amount of load, we just had so many customers who were out for extended periods of time. And so what we've really done is to ensure that our power plants here in San Antonio are winterized in the similar fashion than what happens in the Northeast. Here in Texas, we're trying to get heat out of our plants in the summertime. In the Northeast, you're trying to keep heat in the wintertime. But what we learned, at the highest level is that we have to be prepared for both, summer and winter, extreme weather events, and prepare our infrastructure to be able to handle that. And we've reprogrammed our load shed system to be able to handle what was 5 times more than anything we'd ever experienced in the past. So our ability to continue making the investments to create maximum flexibility during those extreme weather events is really important. So we're going to have to do more, from a compliance standpoint. We're going to have to do more weatherization going into the future years. I think we'll probably have to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million over the next 5 years to be compliant with regulations coming out of Austin. And we've also committed to putting more smart devices out, into our wire system to be able to maximize the amount of customers that we can, the amount of capacity we have to rotate outages. We've focused in on that as a strategy So I believe it's got us in the right place. And again, Paula and I have stood shoulder to shoulder over these last 12 months as she has, moved into retirement and well-deserved. But we've done a lot of work this year to learn from what we experienced in February.
And can you talk a little bit about the recent approval for a rate increase, which I presume, among other things, will allow CPS to make all these necessary investments in order to be better prepared for these events? Because as Paula mentioned, CPS hadn't had a rate increase in over 8 years, which is impressive given rising costs, right? So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's no easy conversation anytime you come in for a rate increase, especially when, as a publicly owned utility, our regulators is our city owner. And so, so there are pressures to ensure that we're being as efficient as we can be. We've cut over $900 million of costs out of our business over the last 8 years to be able to go that long without a rate conversation. But given the challenges of the last 2 years between the pandemic and all the past due balances that have accumulated, we stopped disconnecting customers, which was the right thing to do given the economic conditions of, in our community. And so, but we had to come forward in what was probably the worst time to have a rate request conversation with the city, because there are things happening that are impacting our ability to serve, such as the $31 million that we're going to be investing in resiliency in both our power plants and our wire system. System growth has been phenomenal in San Antonio. I think we're the third hottest real estate market in the country right now. We've got an ERP system, the computer system that runs our business is 22 years old and needs to be replaced. And so we got to think about the next generation. And so there's some investment for that. And then employees, we're down about 400 employees right now, and we've got to get, staffed up. And I'm not talking executives, I'm talking, the engineers and operators and technicians and frontline folks that are fundamental to being a good utility operator. And so, we were successful. It was a difficult conversation, but that'll be a $73 million infusion of capital into our business at a time where we really, really need it. So, our job is to pivot to make good on, the promises that we made to ensure we're providing service at the highest level, which is what CPS Energy is known for. We're one of the best utilities in the country, and my job is to ensure we keep it that way.
And moving forward, what does the future look like for CPS? And as a relatively new CEO, what are your priorities for this new year?
Well, it's going to be a lot of blocking and tackling, Adriana. We got to make some decisions about the future of our generation portfolio. We've still got a coal plant that's relatively new. Our community really does want us to find a way to move away from coal, and I think we can do it in a manner that allows us to continue to be reliable and affordable. But that's a community conversation that we've got to have, and we're geared up to have it so our board can make some decisions towards the end of the year this year. Again, we've got to continue to talk about things like utility burden. In San Antonio, we have a high percentage of our residential customers who are low income, and some of them, the amount of their disposable income that they have that goes towards utilities, may be upwards of 20%, when the average should be in the maybe 3 to 6% range, for most residential customers. So we got to figure out a rate structure that allows us to make sure we're paying attention to that utility burden dynamic in our community, just given the profile of the type of customers we have here. And so between those two things and just trying to get, various aspects of our operation back where they need to be, we have seen service levels decline for our customers as a result of the financial stress that we've been under. And so we're really going to kind of really get focused on getting those metrics back on track.
And thank you. And to close things out, can you summarize in 1 or 2 sentences the key points that you would like to convey to our audience here today?
Well, as Dwayne said before, the challenges facing our industry, we can meet those together by challenging each other in diversity of thought, in working together, to learn from the experiences of each other and to apply those. My deal as a CEO is all about execution, so it's not just about the idea, it's how to take that idea and turn it into reality. And so that's what I'm going to, be focused on here. But I couldn't agree more. None of the challenges facing us are challenges that we can't overcome as long as we continue to expand our reach, to build those relationships. I mean, Paula said it best. I'm a relationship guy. I'm a high communicator. I love people. I love, meeting new people and bringing in new ideas. And, and that's what I intend to do for as long as I have the opportunity to sit in this seat.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rudy. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope we have more conversations like this in the future. And Clint, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you. Before you go off screen, I just want to compliment you both on a wonderful fireside chat. And I think Adriana is now the gold standard for hosting this type of chat. And we will indeed do this in the future periodically, because it's been so beneficial right now. I also want to say on a personal level that I think it is obvious, if you know Rudy Garza for more than 60 seconds, that he's a humble man. And but I think when you look at the path of his career, as Adriana just elicited, it's really extraordinary and exciting. Very, very similar on a parallel trajectory to Paula Gold Williams' path, growing up on the east side of San Antonio and becoming the first African-American female to be the CEO of a major utility in the United States. And another thing I want to say about Rudy is that he walked into one of the hottest landing zones I've ever seen. The aftermath of Winter Storm Uri, which was essentially a failure of the market, the ERCOT market, and regulatory failure, two things that CPS had absolutely no control over, no jurisdiction over. They inherited a lot of the blame and scapegoating because residents in the community did not realize that this was an ERCOT failure and a regulatory failure, and they just thought the local utility must have made a big mistake. And Rudy has done a really impressive job of turning that around and allowing people to trust CPS in a good way, following Paula's terrific leadership. So special compliment. I've seen it up close, and I just wanted to mention that on your behalf. So thank you both. Just
thank you, my friend. I appreciate you having me today.
And now, if I can bring Lawrence on screen, Lawrence Jones. And Lawrence is in charge of all of the international programs of Edison Electric Institute. He is, I think he has 70 members now and more than 90 different countries in terms of operations. He's a very special friend of mine, and I have observed his thought leadership over a number of years now. And Lawrence is always someone that I want to listen to when he's speaking. Like Paula and all of our speakers today, he's received so many awards that actually I'm told he has hired a forklift operator to transfer his awards to a new enlarged trophy case. It serves on so many boards that I could not possibly list them in the time frame we need. But Lawrence, in addition to growing up in Africa and then receiving his education in Sweden and now running this extraordinary program for Edison Electric Institute not only understands the United States, but he's a true internationalist. And so, Lawrence, can you talk to us a little bit about the key trends that your CEOs are discussing with you? And then we'll move on to Europe. I know that Bob G will talk about Russia and Ukraine based on his extensive international experience, but we'll ask you ultimately to talk a little bit about the sort of the traditional energy calamity in Europe right now. But let's start with general trends.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. And I really was delighted to hear from Rudy, and I wish him all the best in his new endeavor. And also to Dwayne, congratulations for your RRP. You know, Clint, as I think about it right now, obviously there are 5 things that when I talk to utility executives around the world and leaders that I think are common. And let's just focus on, I think, first of all, decarbonization remains front and center. I think the energy industry, the electricity sector, especially, continues to do a lot to sort of keep the trajectory of decarbonizing the world as a key point for them to move forward. So it's on everyone's radar as we go forward, especially in the aftermath of COP26. The other issue that is front and center is affordability. Obviously, I think it was Rudy who mentioned it, or doing this issue of making sure that the energy transition is just. Utility executives that I talk to are all singularly focused on making sure that whatever investments they have to make, whatever changes they have to make, they keep in mind the fact that policymakers have to ensure also that affordability remains front and center. And I think that is very important. And we see it all over the world, irrespective of jurisdiction, irrespective of regulatory frameworks, the issue of affordability is center. You talked briefly, I think Adriana and Rudy talked about Texas. Resilience. I'm surprised to the extent to which no one ever talks about reliability anymore, because we have reliability under control. What is really front and center on everyone's mind now is the issue of resilience, and how do you go about ensuring resilience? I think it was doing, I talked about diversity of supply. There are many different ways to make resilience work. You mentioned, Clint, the issue of electricity markets, how the markets are designed. So I think resilience is going to be the sort of the dominant theme for the electricity sector worldwide over the next decades, I would say, because there's a lot to be done there. I think the other issue that everyone is thinking about now, given that we're in this sort of a time of inflation where there is even talk of greenflation now, is the issue of investment in the infrastructure. I think it's going to be extremely important to meet the climate goals and to meet other goals we have in society, that the energy, electricity infrastructure is not just beefed up for resilience, but it also has to be designed to meet the new demands, whether it's electric transportation, whether it's the need for flexibility markets across Europe and other parts of the world. I think the new infrastructure has to be something that utilities are spending more time on. And then the last 2 ones, they're somewhat related, obviously, is now global supply chain. For a long time, the electricity sector in many parts of the world thought that the supply chain issues would be manageable. But the longer the pandemic has gone on, and the longer these issues about inflation and other things are happening, we're beginning to see some concerns about the supply chain. And so more and more companies are now sort of really focusing on how to ensure that the supply chain is there, because as you know, we're having these extreme weather events, oftentimes in multiple months, if you may. And so you need to make sure you not just have reserve in your supply chain, but you also have a strategy to make sure how you can secure those technologies over time. And then the last thing that they're focusing on is innovation. And I think this is one that oftentimes you don't hear about, but I think electric companies around the world are really looking at innovation, and not just technological innovation. They're also looking at business models. They're also looking at models around work. Given the fact that the pandemic has really transformed work, they're also exploring how to make sure they have the workforce that's there and harnessing this sort of a human-machine interface in terms of, say, for example, you're going to be using drones. You know, Rudy was talking about the workers. Well, you know, modern workers for utilities will have to perhaps combine using drones and artificial intelligence when they're managing the system. So those are the 6 things I think I'm hearing across the globe in terms of where the utility sector leaders are.
Lawrence, can you give us a few more examples on supply chain in particular. And then I'd like to come back to you on electric vehicles as well.
Sure. So I think as a one anecdote example for supply chain is what happens with regards to, say, the issue around transformers. I was talking to a company in New Zealand, and we're discussing this issue of transformers and where they got it from. Now, my assumption was that they were getting the transformers from, say, Asia. But it turns out they were actually getting the transformers from a company in Georgia in the United States. And the guy said, this executive said, he said, Lawrence, my biggest problem for supply chain is not Asia, it is the United States. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we have to import our transformers from the US. Now, most people wouldn't know that the US actually is exporting transformers, small transformers, to a country all the way, way in New Zealand. But that just shows you how the supply chain issue is so complex. Another example, the utility in the UK, when they had issues with natural gas in the UK in the fall, he said to me that one of the things that affected their operations was not having enough reserve gas or gasoline, more or less, for their fleet vehicles that would go out and do maintenance and maintenance and operation. So the complexity of the supply chain is finding its way into a lot of things that we've taken for granted. The last one is more long-term, because you said electric vehicles, is lithium ion and sort of a critical minerals. And that is something I'm sure Bob G can talk about, but the importance of critical minerals and what it means is going to really affect how the energy transition occurs over the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Lawrence. Can you tell us a little bit more about the development of electric vehicles, not just in the United States, but globally, and what that means for the utility industry?
Sure. I think the utilities are now, by and large, preparing themselves for the onslaught. And I call it onslaught because we're seeing it now. We see it in Europe, for example, in Norway. We're seeing it in other parts of Europe. We're beginning to see it in the US with bus fleets being electrified. I think the preparation being done by the utilities is not just because of beefing up the grid to be able to deal with the fluctuation of charging and what it would mean. But I think there's a huge opportunity to accelerate electrification of transportation because the impact it would have on the overall economy from the standpoint of decarbonization. So I'll give you a few examples. It was recently announced the electric corridor that was announced where EEI and some of the EEI members in the US are coming together to work to advance the building of these corridors. You have similar ideas being explored in Europe as well as in the Middle East to build these corridors. And I think this presents a huge opportunity for the electric companies to be able to not just see an increase in electricity demand, but I think more importantly is the fact that you could actually see EVs being used to some extent when you aggregate them to provide some degree of flexibility to the grid. And so you could see this sort of a vehicle to grid, grid to vehicle sort of an interaction taking place over the long haul. The last point I would make, Clint, on electrification and transportation is a lot of the focus in the developed world has been on EVs for transportation or for cars. The new trend is EVs for electric scooters, EVs for the three-wheelers we see in India. So if you think about it, mobility, and nowadays I actually don't even talk about transportation electrification. I talk about the electrification of mobility, because it's not just the cars, it's the airplanes, it's the scooters. In Norway, you have ships being electrified. So I think this whole mobility space is going to see significant transformation because of technology and the role that it will play on electrification.
What kind of time frame are you looking at for the corridor, the infrastructure corridor for electric vehicles that you just described as a major EEI initiative?
So I should have thought you were going to ask me that question regarding once I said that. I have to double check. I think there is some work already being done. I know that AEP is one of the leaders involved in this space here. I don't have the exact date, but I think if the audience wants to go to either the EI website or the AEP website, or even I think DTE is also involved, there may be more information. But I imagine that because part of this is all part of the infrastructure package that was recently passed, I think you could see things happening there fairly quickly because there is a pent-up demand for having charging stations around the country to accelerate the use of electric vehicles.
My impression is that the initiative is planning a very quick pace,
Yes.
which will be terrific. And on the subject of electric buses and such, I've served for many years with the World Resources Institute. They've just gotten $100 million grant from the Bezos $10 billion Earth Fund to electrify school buses by 2030. So these are ambitious goals, and I think we're going to see transformative development. It's already started, but in the next 5 or 6 years, there'll be really a different landscape on this. Lawrence, you talked about innovation also as a key theme. Can you develop that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, sure, I'll be happy to. So for a long time, there has been this perception that the electric industry or the energy sector, electricity specifically, that the sector doesn't integrate. And the problem is innovate. And the reason is because a lot of the innovation is what I call invisible. You don't actually see what's happening because most of it is on the infrastructure side. What we're now seeing is that innovation is going beyond just the infrastructure. We're beginning to see innovation even in terms of how business processes are transforming. I'll give you an example. Before the pandemic, when it came to how utilities will deal with their asset management, much of that was perhaps involving physical interaction between the operator and the device. Now, thanks to technology, you're seeing more remote monitoring, remote operations of these assets, because obviously, people can get in the field. Drone technology is one of those areas where you see a lot of application, not just for resilience or restoration after storms, where you have now drones being used to help to bring the system back up. But drones are also being used now for inspection. Dwayne talked about building more transmission in some parts of the world. In Asia, for example, and parts of New Zealand, where you have these sort of high mountain ranges, they're using drones for all kinds of inspection. The other area, coming back to the human side, is the more we see how customer-facing technology is being used by utilities now, so people can, in many parts of the world, pay their bills. You're using all kinds of digital medium for that. So I think a lot of innovation is being done. Two other areas of innovation, and I think Kate might get into this when she talked from Capital Power, but it's on the generation side, right? So you have everything from small modular reactors being invested in. You have this issue around carbon capture and utilization. Another area where you see a lot of innovation, and one that I'm very fascinated about is energy storage, especially long duration storage. So I think innovation now is not just IT technology based, it's also generation side innovation, which is, I think, it's something that the industry will really benefit from through more international collaboration, because some of these things take time. Last I mentioned here is also hydrogen. You're also seeing a lot of innovation around investments in hydrogen, pilot projects, and other things. So I think this is a great time to be in the energy industry, just because the innovation is really at the forefront there.
We have our clients have really begun serious investment in the U.S. on hydrogen. Our European clients and region has been historically far ahead of us on hydrogen, but I think the U.S. is really catching up now. If what we're seeing anecdotally is a trend, which I think it is. Same thing on drones. We're doing a major webinar on drones, I think, within the next few days, and that is another really fast growth issue for our clients, not just in the U.S. but all around the globe. Lawrence, you understand Europe very, very well, and studied there, and your representation of utilities in Europe has given you in-depth knowledge. What happened on the energy side in Europe that has caused such a mess right now, and what do you see as the way out?
So there are no simple explanations to these kind of complex problems. I think it was a confluence of forces that came at the same time, right? So coming out of the pandemic, you had this huge demand for energy, right? And obviously, no one anticipated the demand was going to be this massive coming out of it, right? So the economic recovery brought a lot of pressures. Combine that with sometime a couple of months ago, you had this issue around, and in fact, the natural gas issue started in Europe, as early as last spring or even before then, right? You started seeing some shortage being announced and what have you. You combine that then also with the issue around renewables, where at some point in time we didn't have a significant amount of wind and solar and all this stuff coming online at the same time. And then in conjunction with that, and recently you had some nuclear plants in France that had gone out for maintenance. So all of these things coming together just created this sort of this very complex in an environment, and the electricity prices, obviously, because it's tied to energy prices, started to go up. And so what I think is happening now in terms of trying to sort of mitigate the risk, you're seeing more and more now people to say, well, we need to really think diversity of supply, as Dwayne mentioned. And so you're now seeing nuclear power being really considered as an option seriously now compared to the past, to the point where, as you probably know, recently the European Union came up with a taxonomy for sustainability, and they have now agreed, or they've proposed to include nuclear as part of that. And so you're seeing more and more countries talking about nuclear, and one of the reasons is because they see it as an opportunity to reduce the dependency on gas from Russia, something I know Bob G will talk about a little bit more in detail. So those were the issues, not a single issue. I know people have tried to make it one thing or the other. It's a little bit more complex. The fact of the matter is prices are still too high, and they're expected to be that way for some time until things kind of begin to settle down.
Thank you, Lawrence. Great explanation. Maybe the most succinct and complete I've heard so far. Let me ask you a concluding question, the one we've been asking each of our guests today. If you were to boil down to one sentence or two the essential theme that you want to convey to our participants today, what would that be?
So I would say two things. I would say the first, we are 8 years away from 2030, and we are 28 years away from 2050. Speed and scale are important for the transition, but speed and scale must also take into consideration the unintended consequences, that how this whole society transitions doesn't create more problems for sort of underprivileged neighborhoods and underprivileged communities. So balance and speed, scale, affordability is going to be important. But remember, we only have 8 years to 2030 and 28 years to 2050.
Thank you, Lawrence. What a great job. And of course, that brings us back to your word of the decade at least, and that is resilience, and the need to focus on resilience with extra care as we're moving at this kind of accelerated pace. Wonderful job today. Great to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
And our next speaker and host, my partner, Andrew Shaw, who is a leader in our public policy practice, but also is embedded deeply in our energy practice. We'll interview Kate Chisholm, who is a senior vice president, it seems, in charge of just about everything important at Capital Power, and a very valued client of our law firm and a very inspirational figure in Canada, often named one of the top 100 women of the year in Canada, for example. So Andrew, if you could introduce us to Kate, and we look forward to hearing from you both.
Well, thank you so much, Glenn, and thank you to the Denton Smart Cities think tank and the Keystone Policy Center for the opportunity. And it's a real pleasure to be here today with the other participants, and particularly Kate Chisholm, who I've had the good fortune of working with for quite some time at Capital Power. And as Glenn noted, Kate has a number of significant distinctions for her work, and serves on a variety of boards and governing bodies. So thank you to Kate for being here today, and I look forward to our conversation. Maybe at the outset, maybe Kate, if you can just talk a little bit about Capital Power for those that aren't familiar with the company, and maybe talk a little bit too about your role at the company.
Well, thanks, Andrew. And thank you so much for including me in this august company. It's quite an honor to be on this panel with such fantastic speakers. Also a little bit intimidating to follow such fantastic speakers, but Capital Power is a publicly traded independent power producer with generating units in 3 Canadian provinces and 13 states. So we straddle the 49th parallel. We generate power from wind, solar, natural gas, now getting into utility scale batteries. And our last coal unit will be converted to gas in 2023. My role, I was the chief legal officer at Capital Power since before Edison invented electricity, and have led environmental policy and investor relations at the company as well. And so about 2016, I went to our CEO, Brian Vasjo, and said, I really think that Capital Power needs to have a chief sustainability officer because we really need to have sustainability factored into many of our investment decisions. And he said, okay. That conversation took a little longer than I portrayed here, but and then in 2020, we realized as an executive team that if you're an energy company or a power company, you really can't do sustainability and strategy separately. Your strategy is your sustainability business plan. And so I was then given strategy. And so since then, I've been its chief sustainability and strategy officer. And it's really fun because I'm hoping I get to talk to you about some of the projects that we're working on in the innovation space today.
Well, it has been really exciting to work with you and the Capital Power team and see some of those moves and that strategic leadership that you've been providing. We've talked throughout this event about diversity and inclusion and a little bit on ESG, but I would like to get maybe your take too, as you move forward and you try to attract young talent to the company. How important do you see Capital Power's commitments to climate, ESG, and diversity and inclusion?
I think they're critical to the ability not only to attract new talent, but also to retain talent. I mean, I'm an old lady, and so in the course of my lifetime, I think that work habits have changed. My father was of a generation in which people worked for the same company for their entire lives. And my generation was not like that. We have typically, on average, changed jobs about every 10 years. But millennials and younger want more than anything to have their work mean something. They really want to make a difference in the world while they earn a living. And so they will measure the quality of their work life, not just by how much money they earn and how much they like their colleagues, but also by whether or not they feel they're making a contribution to fixing the world's problems. And so we rolled out a corporate purpose this year, and Capital Power's corporate purpose is to power a sustainable world for people and planet. And, you know, we've heard over the course of this morning, Dwayne, Rudy, and Lawrence talk about what I would call the power trifecta, which is environmental responsibility combined with reliability and affordability. And you can't really get one at the expense of another. And so the Capital Power Brain Trust, which is our millennials and below, are working very, very hard to figure out how we can decarbonize the world to net zero, but in a way that does not produce energy poverty or unreliability, because we need to keep the hospitals running. We need to keep residents' fridges and freezers running, et cetera. And I think that they really are caught up by the public purpose that we've devoted ourselves to. It helps.
Well, that's great, and it's certainly a welcome trend and bodes well for the future for this industry. You talked about and referenced some of the net zero investments, and Lawrence also talked about it a little bit in the sense of carbon capture. Capital Power has been a real leader on this front. I know you've made a major investment with your plans for the world's largest commercial scale production facility of carbon nanotubes at your Genesee generating station in Alberta. Can you tell the group a little bit more about the project and maybe also the role that carbon utilization can play going forward?
Sure. Well, so just backing up a little bit, I think Lawrence talked a little bit about this too, it being only 8 years to 2030. Our feeling is that in a world in which it can take a while to get infrastructure permitted and then financed and built, we really don't have that much time before 2030. And the report that came out recently from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has suggested that if the world doesn't reach its 2030 goals, we're not going to reach our 2050 goals either. And so we believe that using technology that is available and proven today will help us get to 2030. And then because there isn't really very much time left within which to do R&D between now and 2030, and that there are some very promising technologies that we're working on for the post 2030 to 2050 time period. And so at our Genesee facility, which is 3 large coal units, 2 subcritical and 1 supercritical, we had originally decided that we were just going to convert them all to gas. So essentially we were going to leave their guts the same, and we were just going to burn natural gas in the coal turbines. But what we've decided to do instead is repower 2 of the units to brand new turbines that will be hydrogen capable when they're installed. That will not only cut their emissions in half, 40% reduction in their emissions, but it will increase their capacity by 40%. And then as soon as we've done that, we're going to attach carbon capture and storage to those 2 units, which will reduce their emissions down to almost nothing. And then on the 3rd unit, what we're doing is what you were talking about, Andrew, and we're creating what is called the Genesee Carbon Conversion Center. And what it does is it captures carbon from our stack and converts the carbon into what are called carbon nanotubes, which look like little black cake sprinkles. And they can be incorporated into downstream construction materials and other things to make them lighter, stronger. And so we've got a partnership with Lehigh Cement, which you may know is one of the largest cement manufacturers in the world. And they are doing testing now that we hope will prove that by incorporating carbon nanotubes into cement, they can make cement stronger with less. And so when they use it on roads, when they use it to build bridges and so on, they will avoid not a lot of, but about 30% of the emissions, their downstream emissions, by incorporating the carbon nanotubes into them. Carbon nanotubes are stronger than steel, lighter than carbon, and more conductive than copper. So there are a lot of uses for them. And our process, they've been made for a long time, but our process can do it at approximately 1/10 the cost of some of the other processes. They've already been incorporated, in fact, into the skin of some airliners to make the airliners fly further on a tank of jet fuel. And we have large ambitions for this. With the thought that if we can create a market for the carbon nanotubes, then the revenue we earn from the sale of them will actually offset the cost of capture. And at that point, we would like to be starting to plant direct air capture units around North America, because we have large natural gas units on which we can attach carbon capture at source, at the point source. But we also have smaller ones, and we believe that natural gas units capacity factors are going to diminish over time. And so they will be running less often. They'll be running to address situations that batteries can't address, like Winter Storm Uri and other long-term droughts, wildfires, et cetera, et cetera. And this will be the economic way to deal with those smaller units. But in addition to that, the IPCC has said that it's not going to be enough anymore to avoid emitting more carbon. What we're going to need to do is start removing carbon from the atmosphere. And we believe that post 2030 direct air capture is the way is one of the ways to do that. But I totally agree with people like Lawrence and Dwayne and Rudy that mentioned that from a resilience perspective, what we really need is an all of the above solution to this. We can't be picking winners and losers on the technology front now. It's just too soon to do that.
Well, it is a really exciting opportunity and really a game changer, I think, in changing what we've thought of when it comes to carbon capture and utilizing that for such important uses. So we look forward to continued positive news on that front.
Andrew, can I just add?
Sure.
There are companies other than Capital Power who are making uber cool products out of captured carbon. And these products render the carbon inert, so it will never again be released into the atmosphere. And examples would be Air Products, which is headquartered out of New York, is making vodka. If any of you are vodka fans, please buy some Air Products vodka. But they're also making soap and household cleaners and so on and so forth. And so I just wanted to give a little plug for those of you who are sustainably sourcing to give some carbon products a try.
I am a vodka fan, so I will have to look into that for my next bottle. Kind of sticking in Alberta, we know that Alberta has had a price on carbon for a while, and the electricity sector there is far along on the learning curve of addressing how you manage carbon prices. I wonder if there are lessons to be learned for the U.S. and Alberta's experience with carbon pricing.
Well, thanks for that question. I believe there are. It's interesting, having one foot in each of Canada and the US, because you can see best practices on both sides of the border. And Alberta has had a carbon tax since 2007. And the Alberta government made what I think is a very good decision insofar as they decided that what they were going to do is not throw the revenue from the carbon tax back into general revenue. What they were going to do is create a fund from which to support R&D in clean tech. And so they've had an opportunity to invest. They've attracted a lot of developers. And I think that Alberta has benefited from that significantly. But the federal government in Canada has also decided to ratchet up the amount of the carbon tax over a period of time. And it's now set to go as high as $170 per ton in 2030. And I think that's probably having a beneficial effect as well, the ratchet. My personal feeling, and I think this is shared by a lot of people, is that ratcheting the price so that it incents good work is a very good thing to do. But you can't sort of ratchet the price beyond a point that technology can keep up, because if you do that, then it really is just a tax on consumers. It's not going to produce any further emissions reductions. And so the government of Canada is balancing that quite carefully, which is good. They are coming out with a 2035 plan within the month. And so everybody in Canada is watching that very, very carefully. But in the meantime, a lot of us that have some experience in the US and like the US's 45Q very much, have now been asking the federal government in Canada to adopt something which is 45Q-esque. And I think I'm very hopeful that that will be included in this 2035 plan. And so I'm very thankful to the US for giving us that best practice to apply up here. It's funny, Andrew, because there are well more than 40, probably 50 major transmission lines between Canada and the US. And a lot of people don't realize that, but I mean, it's really one single electric grid. There have been times when problems in California have turned the lights off in BC, and problems in Quebec have turned the lights off in New York. And so we really, really need to work very closely together, because electrons don't recognize that border. And I think we're doing very good work together.
Well, great. And it is very much a North American grid, which I think is a really important point. And we've been focusing on a lot on Canada, but your company is investing a lot in solar in the US. So I'd be curious to kind of get your take on the attractiveness of solar in the US and opportunities and challenges you see in the years ahead.
Well, I mean, many of the benefits of solar are pretty obvious. It has zero variable cost. And so if you, like Capital Power, are trading into competitive markets, California, ERCOT, Alberta, et cetera, that the low variable cost is significant, in addition to its obvious environmental attributes. The challenge, and by the way, Alberta is second only to the US Southwest in its solar resource. So we have solar in many different places around North America, but the issues I think we're going to have are recycling. Solar panels are a bit of a problem at their end of life. We also have the forced labor issue. And so we are working with a number of our US utility friends to figure out how to source sustainably, and by that I mean a steady supply of solar panels that are not made using forced labor. And so, you know, it's funny because none of these renewable sources of energy are a panacea from every perspective, but solar seems very, very promising to me.
Well, that's great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. So, but maybe to conclude, similar to the other participants, maybe I'll ask you to, and maybe one or two sentences, provide your thoughts on energy policy and what we see in the years ahead.
Well, I would just say the energy industry, the power sector, but also the energy industry at large is comprised of individuals who have children and grandchildren and who are absolutely ardent about climate change. And we, although we get demonized somewhat in some areas, we are doing our best. We are on top of this, as Rudy said, and we will be leaving the world healthier for future generations. And so with that, pass the word, please.
Well, thank you very much, Kate. Appreciate your leadership and Capital Power's leadership. With that, I will turn it back to my colleague, Clint.
Really terrific job. I love presentations where I learn completely new information, including the direct air carbon capture technologies that Kate just covered. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Kate. Really special job and contribution today. And our next guest, Robert G., has been a friend for, I don't know if I should reveal it, Bob, at least 3 decades.
At least.
I think he really is one of the most knowledgeable policy people, not just for the United States, but beyond, that I know. He's one of my key go-to people when I need advice. And he has done it all. He's worked as an attorney at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. He has chaired the Texas Public Utility Commission back when it was a highly regarded institution. And he was so popular, he had a hearing room named after him. He has also served in key leadership roles at the Department of Energy, including the Assistant Secretary for Policy position, which is usually the premier assistant secretary position. And he has been in private practice. He founded and leads G Strategies. Also, very importantly, he founded and leads AE2C, which is Asian Americans in Energy, the Environment, and Commerce. Bob is a senior advisor to Dentons and also a co-chair of the social equity pillar of the Dentons Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank. Bob, there are so many rich opportunities that have been raised in the discussion with our other participants. Let me ask you first, since it is so timely and you are such an expert in this field, can you talk a little bit about Winter Storm Uri, your perception of events, and your looking forward, what grade you would give to the regulatory structure?
Thank you, Clint, and thank you once again to you and your colleagues at Dentons, and certainly to the Keystone energy policy folks for the opportunity to take part in this wonderful fireside chat today. Regarding Texas, I would say they are making some incremental progress in fits and starts, but at best, I would give them an incomplete grade to date. And the reason why is, and I'll just go back to about a year ago when this unfortunate event transpired, where, as you know, there was a massive power failure that covered almost 90% of the state in the ERCOT region. You had a wealth transfer of some estimated at least as high as $50 billion, much of which has still been unaccounted for. You had a loss of life, upwards of, some say, as high as 700 people that died during that, as a consequence of the power going out during that 5-day period. In June, I co-authored a white paper and an op-ed in the Houston Chronicle, along with 4 former Texas public utility commissioners, which included prominent notables such as Pat Wood, who also chaired FERC during the Bush administration. And we set out a set of about 20 recommendations for the state leadership to follow in the aftermath of that storm. Some of the recommendations, I'm happy to say, were followed. Others were unfortunately ignored, such as the recommendation that the ERCOT board not be made up of political appointees for the independent board seats. But importantly, one recommendation that I thought was the most important has still not yet been observed, and that was to create a forum for total transparency, to investigate what transpired, and to share that outcome of that investigation with the public. The only investigation we've had to date of what transpired in Texas was through the joint FERC-NERC investigation that recently released its reports on the root causes of what transpired and some of the potential remedies that they're now exploring. And I would note that, importantly, there was a hearing on Capitol Hill just yesterday to follow up on that addressed the subject of whether there ought to be some type of a NERC-type organization for the gas industry that would cover not only Texas, obviously, but the rest of the country as well. The sad part of what transpired is that even though the Texas PUC, my old commission, is trying to undertake efforts to address some of the remedies that were prescribed to them by the Texas legislature in the last session. And, and I'm not going to fault them right now. They're all new to their jobs. They're under tremendous pressure. They've got the governor breathing down their neck. They've had to make promises that the lights won't go out this winter. Nobody hopes that promise is breached, obviously, but there's an awful lot of risk involved in trying to rework the system through a process of investigating what transpired, through the process of imposing weatherization requirements on power generators, through market reforms that they're now undertaking to try to examine and implement. But a big piece that's missing from that, and it's pointed out, obviously from the role of the gas sector, and that is the sister agency, the Texas Railroad Commission, has not undertaken a similar process to weatherize the infrastructure and the production fields that provide gas to the power sector. Texas experienced an outage in 2011, and NERC prescribed a number of remedies that were ignored. They have now since been adopted by the Texas PUC to be imposed on the power sector. But importantly, no weatherization requirements are being imposed on the gas sector. In 2011, gas made up 20% of the state's supply for power generation. Today, it makes up 40%. You simply can't ignore the fact that the growing role that gas plays in generating power is going to mitigate the need to make sure that power, that fuel source is made certain, particularly during critical peak periods such as the winter temperatures that Texas experienced last year. So right now, situation in Texas that everybody is holding their breath. They're hoping that they can make it through this winter. They also have the summer to contend with, because typically many of the potential warnings on the ERCOT system operator's screen show up in summer, not winter. So you've got two periods that this state is going to have to weather to see whether they make it past this curve before we even get to the point where we can say that the system in Texas should be as reliable as it should be, based upon enhanced technology as well as, let's just say, enlightened regulation.
Might be time for you to write another op-ed, Bob. And,
well, certainly if the power goes out, and I'm not rooting for that, quite frankly, but we hope that nothing adverse transpires in Texas. Nobody roots for that, but there is a concern that they're still flying on a wing and a prayer at this point.
And to put an exclamation point on what you have said, at Winter Storm Uri, more than 200 Texans died, more than 4.5 million Texans were without power during freezing conditions for several days, and still no regulatory treatment addressing the 50 billion wealth transfer that you described, including an independent market monitor report that said there was a $16 billion pricing error in the last 32 hours of the load shed alone by ERCOT. Not even a whisper by the regulatory bodies or ERCOT about that independent market monitor report. So I think your comments here are really vital, and they reinforce concerns expressed by each of our discussants today about the need for resilience. Bob, let's switch gears because we have limited time, and you have unique expertise about Russia, the Ukraine, based on your extensive travel on behalf of DOE to Russia and the former Soviet republics, and also to based on your current travel, including China and Japan. Can you give us an overview there and enlighten us on what you think will be developing?
Yeah, let me answer it this way, Clint. I'll pose the question and then try to answer it. What do U.S. LNG export policy, Nord Stream 2, which is a controversial pipeline that is seeking certification to provide Russian gas to Germany, and the rest of the European energy market have in common? What they have in common is a system that is hugely dependent upon Russian natural gas supplies. Russia makes up about 35% of all gas supplied to Europe. Why is that significant? Because Europe relies for its energy sources on natural gas to the tune of about 80+%. So you factor in those percentages and it's huge. Germany alone relies on 50% of its gas supply from Russia. When I was at the Department of Energy in 1998, I chaired what was then called the Caspian Energy Desk at DOE, which was an effort by the US government to try to work with our private sector, US companies, as well as the newly independent republics from the former Soviet Union, to site and develop a system of pipeline networks for oil and gas that would not rely on Russian sourced oil or gas, and even attempt to route the pipeline so that it would not be traversed over Russian territory. Why? Because the concern was Russian had been so dominant in that region under the Soviet Union that we wanted to try to wean those newly independent states off of the influence of the Russian dominance. At the time, the president of Russia was Boris Yeltsin, who had difficulty staying sober during daytime working hours. Vladimir Putin was only the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg at the time and was a virtual unknown, at least on the world stage. And so Russia was in a very weakened position, and the US saw an opportunity both to help its private sector develop oil and gas fields, particularly in Kazakhstan, and then also reworking the oil and gas fields in Azerbaijan, all in an effort to try to minimize Russian influence in that region. What we see today, unfortunately, is really an unfortunate development of events, which, in my opinion, have largely underscored the failure of the United States to effectuate change in that region. Russia, importantly, its only real commodity that it has that's of value to the rest of the world is its natural resources, specifically oil and gas. And it's using that as a tool to try to exert pressure both on Europe as well as on Ukraine. And Ukraine is sort of squeezed and caught in the middle because there are a lot of ethnic Russians in the middle of Ukraine, particularly in the Crimean Peninsula, and which Russia has claimed to be its own and not under Ukrainian dominion. And the United States is trying to find a way to stave off a Russian invasion of the Ukraine. You might want to note an interesting side effect of this is the studied ambiguity of the Biden administration towards LNG exports. At the very beginning of this administration, it was unclear exactly whether they were going to specifically limit US LNG from being exported in order to minimize not only our dependence on natural gas, but also potentially the world's. The most recent articulation of statements publicly by this administration is that there is no intent to prohibit any exports. And the reason why is because US LNG exports have become a geostrategic tool to help minimize Russian dominance. Specifically, by offering the potential of sale of US LNG to Europe, it has helped those European countries not only rely less on Russian gas, but also using the potential and threat of US LNG exports as a means of securing a better price in those instances where they have to negotiate long-term agreements with Russia. So all of this is tied together. When you think about it, what happens in the Permian Basin and what happens in Louisiana with gas exports out of the Gulf Coast has as much to do with our policies towards Europe and what's going on in the Ukraine.
Brilliant dissertation. Thank you, Bob. Just to close out before I ask you our closing final question, in the few minutes we have remaining, what are some of the trends that you've seen in the United States over the last, in your tenure, over 40 years? What changes do you see in policies, and what are some of the ones that may surprisingly have stayed the same?
Well, in the first instance, what hasn't changed is the customer demand for 4 attributes of our energy ecosystem. And those would be affordability, safety, that it's clean, and that it's reliable. That has not changed. Over my career, I have not seen any deviation from the public's demand for those four attributes of our energy ecosystem. What's changed largely since my career began, and I began my career in the gas sector, gas regulation at the FERC, was the fact that all of the significant activity when in my early stage of my career, particularly on the regulatory side, dealt with the restructuring of the gas industry, both the transformation of gas pipelines from being merchants into transporters of gas, the disaggregation of producers from the pipeline sector, and also the fact that we were still heavily dependent on coal. In fact, the U.S. government had encouraged the use of coal as opposed to natural gas because we thought we were running out of natural gas. What's driving change today, in my opinion, is largely technology in combination with markets. And in many instances, the technology is speeding well ahead of policy. And by that, I mean the acceleration of the digitization of our energy delivery system down to the microprocessor level in all aspects of the energy system, not only for the electric part, but also even for the natural gas production and delivery part. That is driving change because it's introducing the potential for us to speed the rate of delivery, to make the system more efficient, to make it cleaner, to make it much more responsive to customers. And a lot of the activity I'm seeing is actually on the delivery end at the customer interface. And people want to know what's really happening that's going to be transformational. In my opinion, I actually think customer premises equipment and the advanced digitization and integration of that with AI is going to be a significant driver of change, both in terms of our reliance on cleaner energy sources, as well as how power is generated and delivered. And so I think that's what makes this industry so exciting, because there's going to be a lot of innovation we're going to be seeing over the next 10 to 15 years that will potentially be paradigm busters and transform the way we find, produce, and deliver energy.
Bob, I'm going to ask Christine Scanlon to come back on screen, and I will ask you our final question. If you boil down an essential theme that you would like to convey to our participants to one or two sentences, what would that be?
Well,
I would say, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Bob, and then I'm going to reflect on the same question.
No, Christine, you go ahead. I've already said enough. I apologize. You go ahead.
No, I think that was directed for you.
I would say that there was a notable author whose book hit the New York Times bestseller list named Stephen M.R. Covey. He wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And what I like to say is a government typically moves at the speed of trust, and changes in energy policy move at the speed of political toleration. I think that's something that I think we should all be well to observe as we're trying to effectuate change. On the other hand, as I said, a lot of times change is not affected through policy, but it's affected through technology, which few people actually want to or seek to control. So I think that in many respects, government is going to have to catch up. And what it means is it imposes a challenge on them to educate the public about what's going to lie ahead, and also gain public acceptance.
Bob, as you do know, our think tank focuses on modernization of all infrastructure, and we focus not just on physical, but digital and social infrastructure. And I think to the point you've just made, social infrastructure is lagging pretty far behind right now, especially on digitization, but all innovation. And so I hope your guidance will be followed. What a perfect closeout for our discussion today. Each of our discussants really, I thought, hit the ball right out of the park. And Christine, let me invite you to just close us out, and thank you again for the wonderful collaboration with the Keystone Policy Center.
No, thank you, Clint. And I am going to kind of ping off of what Bob said, because your question, Clint, I thought was remarkable with my own thinking. This discussion today has illustrated both the need for collaboration, for finding breakthroughs in terms of policy advancements, recognizing the urgency of the questions that we're confronting, the need for technology and other technological breakthroughs to be advanced and supported and recognized in terms of our own lag in thinking sometimes. But most importantly, it's folks like we heard from today who are going to be leading us into that future. And I very much respected everything I learned today and the very important work they're doing. So Clint, I so appreciate you gathering us together. There's a lot to be done.
Christine, can you join me in giving everyone an ovation for their beautiful job today?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
100%.
we wish you a great remainder of the day.